So what's interesting is that everything that I've really done has been a path to where I needed to go, but I didn't always recognize it. I do now. So when I started doing the breast cancer education, I found out that no matter how many women I send for a mammogram, that if they were diagnosed with breast cancer and they were not healthy, they would have poor outcomes. Not only would they have poor outcomes, they wouldn't be offered the same opportunities for clinical trials or treatment. And part of it was nutrition. They didn't have access to healthy foods. So on the east end of Bridgeport, there's a food desert. When you start talking about organic food, it's very expensive. When you talk about educating people about being healthy, it's difficult when the price of food is so high. So it took me on a journey of looking at nutrition, physical activity, and access to food. And that access to food led me to a group called Food Solutions New England, who's looking at sustainability of food in the New England states, trying to sustain 50% of what we produce by the year 2060. Now, of course, I don't expect to be here in 2060, but I'm trying to help to pave the way for those other generations that will be here. But when I do that work, I understand that if people aren't making a living wage, if people don't have access to food, nothing's going to change. And a lot of this is systemic, and a lot of it is intentional. And it moves people out of certain neighborhoods when they can't get access to food. So when I got elected, there was an opportunity to do several things on that. To look at nutrition, to fight for SNAP benefits for people when many times people were trying to put barriers up that wouldn't allow them to get SNAP benefits or make it more difficult to get stamps. Fight for that. But then talking about access to food, the bodegas, making sure the bodegas have healthy foods in the front of the store. I did a healthy food initiative with the City of Bridgeport and Health Department to try to get 3 stores on the east end of Bridgeport to have fruits and vegetables in the front and move the potato chips and junk to the back. We even did something where we changed the signage in front of the stores, put in refrigeration, new floors and ceilings for the stores so they could have those foods. So that's how you work on the ground, working with local health departments and community people to get that done. But then how do I help them in the legislature? I try to enact laws that will encourage people to present education on food, fight for a wage, a living wage, so people can afford food. And that leads me to, I was, as the chair of human services in my first year, I heard so many stories about how difficult it was for people who weren't making a living wage, making less than $10, because that's prior to the 10-10 minimum wage, who were making like $9 an hour, $9.15 an hour, working 3 jobs with children to make the ends meet. So if they're not at home taking care of their children or fixing the meal, what are they eating? They're eating fast foods. So you've got to raise the wages to make sure that people have access to food and can afford healthy food. So I championed the fight for 15 in my first year, trying to make big box companies such as Walmart and Target pay the state into a fund because we're paying their Care for Kids is a program we pay for people who are low income. We pay for their health care. We give them SNAP, all because they're not making a decent wage. If they were to raise the wages to $15, some of those people would be able to come off of some of those benefits that they receive. So some of the stories were so horrible about working in some of these places that I said when the session ended in June that I would go get a job in one of these stores. Now I don't even go inside Walmart, so that wasn't happening. But I did go online and I applied for a job with Target. And I had heard how hard it was to even get an application in. I applied on a Thursday night, and on a Saturday I was having an interview, and I got hired. And I tried to get like $10.75 an hour, and they weren't hiring that. So I think I got like $10.15 an hour. So I took the job in Target. And when I applied for the job, I said I could work up to 40 hours a week, right? And everything I put on the application was true, but I said I could be available 40 hours a week. Well, I got four hours the single number 4 the first week, and then I got 8 hours. And I got scheduled one day to work to close the store at like 10 or 10:30, and then come back the next morning at 7 o'clock to stock the shelves. And I stayed just about a month. I left because I told somebody in the store that I was working with that I was fighting for them to try and get a higher wage. And he didn't believe me. I told him I was the senator, and he said, "The senator from where?" I said, "Actually, this is my district." He said, "Really?" He said, "Well, we'll never get $15 an hour." I said, "Well, that's what I'm fighting for." What was interesting is that when people walked in the store that knew me, they kind of laughed. They thought, "You don't really work here." I said, "Yes, I did. I had on my tan pants, I had on my red shirt, and I worked my tail off, pulling stuff off the shelves." But it seemed like the harder I worked, the more I did, the more they asked for, right? So I would clear all the shelves, and I remember the young woman who was the floor manager said to me, "Wow, I heard you're doing a really good job." I said, "Well, thank you." She said, "You should try and do this in X amount of minutes." I said, "Oh, that sounds like piecework to me. I don't think I'm on piecework." So that won't be happening. So I stayed, and I learned a lot from that, and I was able to go back and talk to people about that, firsthand what that experience was like. Because many times when you hear some of these stories about low-wage workers and that they're working 3 jobs, I don't think people understand what that means to people's families. I don't think understand what it means to their bodies, to their mental health, to all the negative outcomes that come from never being home with your children, and how it works down and affects your family and your children. That if no one's home because they have to work 3 jobs taking care of children, who's taking care of the children? And it's no longer grandmothers staying home. They're working, so everybody's working. And then kids are getting jobs after school. So if people have to work, they need a decent wage, and they need a fair wage, and they need benefits, and they need childcare. And it shouldn't be the back of the taxpayer when large companies that are very profitable, we're paying for that. They should be paying for that.